Thanks for joining us tonight. We are excited to talk with you about merit scholarships and your college search. Um, just as a little introduction, my name is Jamie Kirby. I am with Estrela Consulting. This is I'm finishing up my second year with Estrela. I'm heading into my third application season next month, actually. About heading into 3 years in the IEC space, and I was a high school counselor for 15 years before that. And my colleague Amber Gilsdorf is here as well. She is going to help run the Q&A. So anytime throughout the presentation, if you have questions, throw them into the Q&A, and Amber can either answer live or save it for the end for us to discuss. And she's also going to help present some of the sections. So Amber, would you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We know that your time is precious, and thank you for giving some of that precious time to us. You can see my background here. Like Jamie, I was a high school counselor as well for 9 years, and in that time ran the college counseling program at that school, and then have been with Estrela, like Jamie, entering my 8th application cycle as we speak.
All right. So our agenda for tonight, we are going to just go over some common language, financial aid. We want to just make sure some of this might be things you already know, but we want to make sure everybody here has kind of a common understanding of what we're talking about before we go too in depth on anything else. And then we're going to do some myth busting about scholarships, some of the common things that we are hearing from students, from families, and try to get the truth around them. Then we're going to talk about merit scholarships at some specific types of colleges. So we'll talk about private, public, and highly selectives. And then we'll talk about list building strategies around merit scholarships, and then some information on third-party outside scholarships as well at the end. And then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. So like I said, anything along the way, feel free to throw them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will address them at the end if Amber doesn't answer live. All right. So just some overview, common language, just to kind of make sure everybody's starting out on the same page here as far as what merit scholarships are versus other types of financial aid. So financial aid is not always just need-based aid. Need-based aid is a piece of it, but merit aid is also a piece of financial aid. So think of financial aid as an umbrella. You're going to see this on the next slide. It's any grant or scholarship, loan, or paid employment offered to help a student meet college expenses. It can come from lots of different places. So it can come from the government, it can come from the colleges itself, it could come from a high school. Sometimes they give scholarships or awards to their graduates, foundations, corporations. So lots of different places that money can come from. It's all under this umbrella of financial aid. And then the amount of financial aid the student receives is determined through federal, state, institutional guidelines. That is more specific to need-based aid, but that is how that is determined. So like I said, financial aid is like an umbrella. You've got need-based aid that falls under there and merit-based aid. So we are not talking about need-based aid tonight. That is a whole separate presentation that we could give on another day, but tonight we're really focusing on the merit-based aid. So scholarships, they could be academic, athletic, extracurriculars, talent, art, music, anything like that. So merit-based aid is usually given for something that you've done. So it could be under lots of different areas, but something that you've demonstrated has nothing to do with how much need your family is showing on the FAFSA or anything like that. And then within the merit scholarships, within that merit aid space, there's two additional categories that this can be kind of broken out into. One is merit scholarships awarded by colleges. So those are given by the college to use at that specific college. That's actually where the vast majority of scholarship money is going to come from. So when we're talking about merit scholarships and working with families, that's really the best place to focus your time and your energy. And we're going to talk about how to do that throughout the presentation. There also, though, are third-party outside merit scholarships. Those are the ones that are coming from local groups, clubs, high schools. They can be national scholarships. They're generally not affiliated with a specific university. So you apply for the scholarship, you get it, and you can use it wherever you go. Slight exception to that is local alumni clubs. So like, for example, I'm in Columbus. The Franklin County Ohio State Alumni Club gives a scholarship, it has to be used at Ohio State. It's still considered an outside scholarship, but has to be used at that college. In general, though, most of those third-party outside scholarships can be used anywhere. All right, so we are going to head into some myth busting. I will be honest, myth busting is the whole reason I wanted to create this presentation, because we have heard so many myths. Everything that is going to be in this next section, we have heard over the last couple of years, either from families, from students, just kind of out in conversations. This stuff is out there. So we're going to try to address some of it and get some truths around there. So the first one, and I'm going to preface this with, I used Ohio State as my example because I am here in Columbus, so I hear this a lot. If you are somewhere else in another state, you could probably substitute another, selective in-state flagship with a similar situation. So my child has a great GPA, really high test scores. I know they're going to get a full scholarship to Ohio State. Not true. They might. There's a couple of them, but it is not likely at all. So let's look at some details of this. Ohio State Stamps Eminence Scholarship is their full cost of attendance, their big full scholarship. Okay. In order to be considered for this, first you have to be accepted to the honors program. Then, on top of the honors program acceptance, you are going to be selected separately from that based on your common application, a separate essay, and a video introduction. And I've seen that essay, it changes every year, but it's pretty intense of an essay. It's this year it was giving a speech to a group about what you accomplished in your life, like looking ahead, 20, 30 years. So then they're selecting based on academic potential, demonstrated commitments to service, and character. So this is not just a high grades, high test scores. This is an all around very, very, very strong applicant. And then after you're selected to be a finalist, you have to interview and participate in a full day event on campus. And then you're going to get selected. Okay, so let's look at a few of these numbers. The current freshman class right now at Ohio State had the largest number of eminent scholars that they've ever awarded. They put that out in a press release. It was 36 of them. So the biggest number that they've ever done, 36 students got a full scholarship. They had 700 scholarship applicants, so only 5% of the scholarship applicants got one. And if you back that up a little further, looking at all of their applicants to Ohio State, 36 students got a full scholarship out of 70,000 applicants. So 0.05% of all applicants to OSU got a full scholarship. Okay, so yes, they exist. No, it's probably not very likely that a student with just a great GPA, high test scores is going to actually get one. Their other full scholarship that they offer, the Moral Scholarship, has 3 different levels. One is full cost of attendance, 2 are full tuition. One of those is full tuition for out-of-state students. So 3 different levels, but as a whole, you could essentially consider this probably a full scholarship as well. This one, in addition to applying for admission, you have to write the Moral Scholarship essay, and they're specifically looking for leadership, service, and social justice involvement in the activity list. So once again, yes, you have to have good GPA and test scores, but you have to have so much extra stuff also to be considered. And then you're going to be reviewed by a committee. They're going to look at those essays, plus they're going to evaluate your activity list, looking at that specific information that they're looking for. So that social justice involvement, that leadership and service. And then you get to interview for that distinction level, that full cost of attendance. So once again, not a sure thing by any means. I will give a caveat right now that with everything happening with federal legislation, the Moral Scholarship eligibility and possibly funding is going to change. Ohio State has said that's happening, hasn't really said exactly what's going to change about it or whether funding is even going to be available for it. So that is a to be determined that we're keeping an eye on. But no matter how they change it, I don't anticipate the numbers going up at all. So numbers, I think, are still worth looking at. So once again, there are other full scholarship numbers. They don't publish the exact numbers, but about 300 students get one each year. So about 4% of all applicants to OSU, and about 25 to 40 of those get that distinction, full cost of attendance. So again, not a sure thing. Very, very, very few students get it. All right, myth number two, Ivies give merit scholarships. Somebody always has somebody they know that got a full ride somewhere. So my neighbor got a full ride to Penn, or my friend got a full ride to Yale. They didn't. It wasn't a merit scholarship. They might have gotten a lot of need-based aid. It was not a merit scholarship, I promise. So here's some information for you to look at. This is from Big J Consulting Resources. It's a fabulous resource to look at how much merit scholarship is possible at different colleges. I have it linked at the end of the presentation, so you'll get a copy of it where you can click and explore as well on your own. The last two columns on here are the most important information. So the average aid awarded for non-need undergraduates, and then the percent of non-need undergrads receiving merit aid. You will see on here, it does look like Brown and Harvard and Yale give merit scholarships. They actually don't. I have some information to show you on the next page. My guess is that in their common data set reporting, they are reporting outside scholarships based on the way that they've worded stuff on their website. So that is not merit aid that's being awarded by the college. Here's their quotes. Brown does not offer aid based on academic achievement, athletic ability, or other forms of merit. Eligibility is based solely on financial need. Assistance from outside sources, however, may be based on a variety of criteria, including merit or financial need. So that's, I think, what they're reporting in that common data set that's showing up on that chart. Same thing with Harvard, same thing with Yale. I won't read all of those to you, but they all have that same general statement. No merit awards, but they might give them from other organizations, or students might have them from other organizations. So your merit award at Ivies and many other highly selective colleges, we're going to talk about highly selectives in a little bit, is that you got accepted. It's pretty much what you get. So getting in is amazing, but they're not going to give you extra money. And we're going to talk about why when we talk about the business side of colleges. The next one, there are millions of dollars of unclaimed scholarships available. I hear this in the news and I hear this on social media all the time, and I don't know why. There are outside scholarships available. There's really not millions of dollars that are unclaimed. I don't know where that's coming from. But many of these scholarships are for smaller amounts. So they might be $2,000 or less. There's a few big ones, but those big ones are incredibly, incredibly competitive. So the vast majority of them are going to be smaller amounts. You should go ahead and apply for them if you want to. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks to kind of be strategic on how to do that, because every little bit that you could get is something you don't have to pay. So you get $500, that's awesome. You don't have to pay that $500. But it should not be your primary strategy to pay for 4 years of college. So if you're planning on using scholarships to pay for college, outside scholarships are not where it's at. It is not a reliable source at all. They also take a lot of time and effort to apply to. So think about everything that your students are involved in. They're doing homework and they've got sports or clubs. They might be in music or dance. They've got jobs. They've got college applications that are taking tons and tons of time. By the time they get through all of that, I find that they often really do not have the time or energy or motivation to do more applications. It's just a lot on them. So, like I said, it's worth doing some if you're strategic with them, but should not be your primary strategy. And also the return on investment. Sometimes students might submit 50 to 100 scholarship applications and receive one. They might receive, 2 or 3, but they're usually not receiving a scholarship for every one that they submit.
Jamie, I was gonna
Yeah.
just chime in here. Like, there are some biggies out there in the private scholarship world, but those biggies usually have really specific criteria for eligibility and or students. We're talking about the students that are also really, 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 really competitive, strong applicants, because they've done things like, they have patents or like are national award winners of something or did something really profound and impactful in their community. These are that level of student are generally the ones most competitive for those biggies. So we've got like Coca-Cola, there's the AXA one. Buick leadership. So they're big ones, but they have really specific, really high shooting criteria.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, so if you're applying to outside scholarships, be strategic, know your college's policies. We have the very last part of this presentation is going to talk more about how to do that. But just keep that in mind. Be strategic is the best strategy to use. Another myth, we'll figure out how to cover the cost of college later. My child's a strong student, they're going to get scholarships. Um, they might be able to, but it's going to take early awareness and planning. That's the most important piece. So if merit scholarships are an important part of your search, you have to think about this right away. Think about it at the list building stage, because understanding how and why colleges award scholarships is going to be vital to you building a list that's going to work for getting merit scholarships. Be aware of the college's policies about receiving merit scholarships, the likelihood of actually receiving one. And like I said, we're going to talk about list building strategies on this presentation. But don't just think, my child's a strong student, I know they're going to get scholarships. They can apply anywhere, they're going to get scholarships. You need to understand what's happening behind the scenes and why scholarships are getting awarded. All right, this one is not quite a myth, but it is misleading information. So I put it here under the myths. Amber and I both hear this a lot. A student in our town received $4.5 million in scholarships. Or the other side of that that's out there sometimes, our high school's graduating class received $30 million in scholarships. We both came from school counseling. We know that schools are using this as marketing tools. You're gonna see it. It's not as meaningful as people want to think it is. It's not exactly a myth, because that amount of scholarship offer money is out there. So it's not fake. It exists, but it's an offer. It's not the amount of money that students are actually getting and taking. So most of that money is coming from the schools that students applied to. They can only actually attend and use one of them. So they're not using the vast majority of the money. It's also a 4-year total. So if a student got a $25,000 scholarship at a college that gives a renewable scholarship, in that total that you're seeing, they're counting it as $100,000. So that's inflating it a lot. And as we've kind of talked about, merit scholarships depend so much on which colleges you're applying to. So that total really reflects more about the student's college list than it does about the quality of the student or the quality of the high school. You could have a student who is just an incredible, very top of the class student who applies to multiple Ivies. And what did we just learn? They don't give merit scholarships. And maybe they apply to they're in-state public, but that also doesn't give a whole lot of scholarships. Maybe their scholarships are very competitive. They don't get any money. They're an amazing, incredible student, but they don't have any scholarship money. That doesn't mean that they're not a good student. It just means they applied to schools that don't give much money. You could also have a fairly average student who was really strategic in their list building and applied to schools where they knew they were going to get money, who could rack up a whole bunch of scholarship money. Once again, not really reflective that they're a better student than the other one. They just build a different type of list. So take those with a grain of salt when you see those totals. They're not quite as meaningful as people like to think they are. All right, so we need to reframe merit scholarships a little bit. This first statement, purpose of merit scholarships given by colleges are to reward students for having high grades, high test scores, athletic talent, musical talent, artistic talent, anything like that. Colleges are just these really, really nice people, these nice organizations that are rewarding students. It's what a lot of people think. It's not really what merit scholarships are for. So we need to think about this in a different light. The purpose of merit scholarships is to attract students that are going to help the college meet their goals by giving them a tuition discount. So colleges might be trying to increase their rankings or increase their average stats. They want to enroll high stat students. They're going to attract those students with scholarships. They might be trying to fulfill specific needs on sports teams, or maybe they're trying to increase involvement in the arts. They're using merit scholarships to attract the students. Doesn't mean that your student's not getting rewarded for something. They are, but the reason for it behind the scenes is not just because the colleges want to be really nice. It really is because they're trying to help build their goals and help meet what they're looking for, and it's their way of attracting students. So if you think about it that way, a lot of what we're going to say after this is going to make a lot more sense. And I love this. This is from Jeff Salingo. He has some amazing resources out there about kind of the business side of colleges and scholarships and tuition. I have a link here to his buyers and sellers list that we'll reference a little bit. There's also a link to it at the end of the presentation. But behind the scenes, colleges are a business. And think of colleges in two different baskets, basically. The first is the buyers. So these are the have-nots in terms of admission, which means nothing about the quality of education. Their education is great, but they're not the schools that have so many students applying that they can just pick anybody they want. They're trying to attract students. So they're working really hard. They're recruiting students. They need to discount tuition through merit aid to get people on their classrooms. They're the ones that are trying to attract those high stat students. They're trying to kind of maintain their rankings. Those are where you're going to see merit scholarships. The sellers are the halves of admission. Once again, not at all reflective of one being a better college than other academically, but they have so many applicants from so many top students. They don't need to attract anybody. They don't need to try to discount tuition. They don't need to be bringing in merit scholarships or bringing in high stat students. They've got plenty of them. They can pick whoever they want from their applications. The schools in that sellers category tend to offer financial assistance only to high need students or truly, truly exceptional students, the like 1% of their top applicants. If you're interested in learning more about this, I really recommend going to Jeff Solingo's website. You can actually download a list of his categorizing of which ones are buyers and which ones are sellers. And you can look at some of the schools you're interested in and see where they fall on that. But like I said, think of it's very helpful if you're thinking about merit scholarships as more of a tuition discount than a award. That's going to help you kind of understand the rest of it. In some cases, there actually is no money on the college end attached to a scholarship. There might be, if it's like a named or endowed scholarship, there might be literal money attached to it, but often they're just charging a student $10,000 less. They're not getting $10,000 from somewhere else. They're just charging you $10,000 less. So that it's like that money sort of disappears on the college end. So that's why they're being strategic with it. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Amber to talk about merit scholarships at different types of colleges. Amber, I'll do
Perfect.
the clicking. So just let me know if I need to click. And I don't.
Excellent. All right, we're going to take you through three different categories of merit scholarships: public institutions, private institutions, and highly selective institutions. Okay, public schools. So public schools are, I mean, we call these state schools. They don't always have state in the name, so that can be a little misleading. But the primary mission of a public school is to serve students in their state. And this is largely because the institution itself is subsidized by taxes and state funding. So in-state students get a lower sticker price. If you want to call, $28,000, $30,000 a year low, lower sticker price. They often rely on full pay out-of-state students to meet revenue goals and balance their budget, although many in-state students also at public institutions, not all, but many can also be full pay because certain schools just don't give a ton of merit aid. So state funding, I mean, I feel like this is everywhere right now. We're hearing about funding, and state funding should, as no surprise, has not kept up with the rising costs of everything to live. So scholarship budgets are definitely limited at public institutions more so than, private ones. So, and that therefore is similar to what Jamie was saying. Their flexibility to give these discounts is more limited. It'll be really interesting to see what happens at public schools and these types of discounts over the next year. So we see two examples here, OSU and Alabama, of schools that give some what we would call an automatic discount for any student who meets the qualifications. So OSU, their ranges tend to be between 1,000 and 3,000 if a student is offered any kind of scholarship. Whereas Alabama, pretty darn lenient and flexible, and they can have anything from 4,000 to full tuition, and then pretty generous with merit scholarships for out-of-state students as well. As I said before, these are what we call automatic, meaning usually it's just based on the student's application for admission that's being used to grant these merit scholarships. Bigger scholarships may, at a public school, like we were talking about eminence earlier, they have a separate application. So some of the bigger scholarships are going to require students to complete additional apps and go through a holistic review process. And as Jamie has said, these are typically very competitive and used to attract really high stats students to come to their state to, fill a spot in their accepted student pool. Click. Yay. This is a great resource list that's just a good snapshot that Jamie put together. As you can see from our asterisk, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are schools that have merit scholarships for both residents and non-residents, and you don't have to be um, the world's top student to get some merit discount. There's a lot of grade inflation right now. I don't know, the composition of our listeners, but if you're a parent, you might not be aware that we're seeing, like, across the board nationwide, just the percentage of students who are carrying 4.0s has, like, gone through the roof. So even not every student with a 4.0 is going to be a slam dunk to get merit scholarships. And then that leaves our dear darling students who are working their tails off, or maybe aren't working their tails off, but still are doing a good job, pulling their 3.4, 3.5, and maybe coming up empty at certain schools with merit scholarships. So these would be good ones to check out, to point a student in a direction toward. And then you can see if you have a national merit finalist, here's, again, not an exhaustive list, but schools that tend to give pretty big scholarships for that designation. All right, so we covered public institutions, so publicly state funded. Private institutions, they often have higher sticker prices, but they have more, not always, but usually more scholarship money that they can offer, whether that's money from endowments and donations and alums or private fundraising efforts that they do. There's more flexibility institutionally with how they distribute their scholarship money. Now, we already talked about highly selective schools tend to be an exception. If we got these schools that they are overwhelmed with applications, they don't need to be giving out discounts. But like I said, private schools, donor support, more money to give. And it may be a way to stay competitive with schools that are maybe in the bracket just above them in terms of selectivity. So if a student's applying to Ivy League schools, there's a bracket of schools kind of in, like, underneath that are still really amazing institutions that give merit aid because they want to incentivize the students who are also applying to Ivy League schools to come to them instead, because they're giving them a discount, where most likely at an Ivy League school, if they're a relatively affluent family, they're going to be paying full price. And then some private schools may give automatic scholarships. So again, utilizing that application for admission as the application for a scholarship and awarding automatically if a student meets the qualifications. And then there could be other scholarships that go through a holistic review process. I have a student, senior right now, who was admitted to SLU, St. Louis University, and she applied to their presidential scholarship. But that was a whole separate application with additional essay and letter of recommendation requirements. So that was a very competitive process for her to just apply for a big financial aid award or merit award. All right. And then we've covered this already, but to underscore the point, highly selective schools generally have the largest endowments of funds and donor support. And most of their giving is focused on need-based aid. So students from backgrounds where they have demonstrated need, their family's ability to pay is below what the cost of attendance is at that institution. And so whatever the family's ability to pay is, and then we have the cost up here, that gap is the demonstrated need, and it is at highly selective schools, not always, but can be fully funded. We see there's these percentages that they throw around on that Big J consulting chart that Jamie was showing earlier. That resource, you can kind of see what percentage of demonstrated need is met at these schools. Most of these highly selective private schools will probably fall somewhere in the 80 and 90 range. So there will still be probably a gap on top of the family's SAI or student aid index. But like Jamie had said before, these are schools that are buyers. They have their pick from the applicant pool. They don't need to attract high performing students. And we said before, your merit award is that you got in. All right, let's move on to our next one. There are, however, nothing we say is like always the hard and fast rule. There can be exceptions, and this is true at some highly selective schools. There are very competitive merit awards out there. But as Jamie says here, we're talking about the top 1% of the applicant pool. So this is not an exhaustive list, but some examples that if you're a counselor on this webinar, you're probably familiar with these. I had a student last year who was in the running for the UVA Jefferson Scholarship, and she's probably one of the top 3 students I've worked with in 16 years of doing college admissions counseling. So that's the perspective to have at these highly selective schools. Like I've worked with thousands of students, and I've got 3 that I can name off the top of my head who are exceptional. She was one of them, and she didn't even get the Jefferson. So that kind of gives you a sense of how selective these ones are. All right, and then Jamie, I'll let you take this slide just because I haven't had it. Jamie put this whole webinar together, you guys. She's amazing. I just looked at my slides and was like, I can talk about this. She's incredible. She deserves all the praise for this one. And as such, you clearly know this chart, so I'm going to throw it back to you for the chart.
You're good. So this is just kind of a summary of what we were talking about. So you can sort of visualize, where different schools might fall on the aid policy and the type of merit aid that they give. So these elite and near elite schools, think of these are often those buyers in the buyers and sellers list. They don't need to attract students. They can pick whoever they want. They tend to meet a lot of need, but they don't tend to give very much merit aid. So little to none merit aid, little merit aid. Here's just a few examples of that. The mid-market and other schools. And if you look at these numbers, that's really where the vast majority of colleges fall. There's only about 100 to 125 that are going to fall in this like full need, close to full need, but little merit aid. About 2,000 colleges are out there that are going to give either some or a lot of merit aid. They might not meet full need, but they do have a lot of merit aid in there. The problem is that so many people tend to focus on these 100 to 125 colleges in their list building, and that's where we're going to go next is list building strategies. So if merit scholarships are important to you, you need to be thinking about including some of these, schools that give significant aid. They might have higher admission percentages, and they might not quite have the name brand of some of the other colleges, but that's where you're going to get a lot of merit money. All right, so we're going to talk about list building strategies. So like I said, the most important piece behind whether you're going to get merit scholarships or how many merit scholarships you might be eligible for is going to be what colleges you apply to. So you need to be thinking about this in the list building stage. So your first strategy, most important thing you need to do is think about your priorities. You're going to have to prioritize some of these things. And it might not be exactly what you want to do. So that's really where you need to think about what is most important to me or to my student. The first is merit scholarships or prestige. Which is more important? Because you're probably not going to be able to get both. Um, we've said, multiple times throughout the first half of this presentation, Ivies don't give merit scholarships. Highly selectives give very few merit scholarships. This is a quote from Jenny Kent, who's from Big J Educational Consulting. Like I said, we've used some of their charts in our presentation. You can chase merit money or you can chase prestige, but you're not going to chase both. You can't get both. It's very, very difficult. Like we said, there are some merit scholarships out there. They're so, so competitive that at the list building stage, you really need to be thinking about what's more important to you. If prestige is more important to you and you're willing to pay full pay, that's totally fine. Go ahead with it. Maybe you'll be one of the lucky ones that gets one of those big scholarships, but don't rely on it. If merit scholarships are important to you, and then you need to be able to think about it. You might have to give up some prestige for that. The other priority to think about is, are merit scholarships more important to you, or are specific colleges more important to you? For my example on here, I have, do you have your heart set on Clemson, Tennessee, UNC, a school like that? If you're really set on one of those specific colleges and you're out of state, you're pretty likely to be paying full sticker price to it. But if you're willing to be kind of open to some possibilities, like you want a Southern public, but maybe it doesn't have to be Clemson or have to be Tennessee. Think about Alabama or Kentucky because they give a lot of scholarship opportunities. So you can look at, there might be similar schools out there that have kind of a similar size or vibe. Might not be the exact school you're looking for, but maybe you can get merit scholarship money there. So that's another priority to think about. And everybody's going to have a different answer to that, and that's okay. But you need to consider that early on in your list building stage. So your next strategy is then to research the approaches to financial aid. So do they give merit scholarships? Do they only give need-based aid? We have a couple examples here from websites. If you go to their financial aid website, it's usually pretty clear, like front and center. So Grinnell right here, first year applicants to Grinnell College are considered for merit scholarships. Perfect. We know right there they give merit. Often there'll be details then after that about, how, or if they've got a chart, sometimes they have charts, things like that. Bates offers need-based aid to make your education affordable. Nothing there about merit aid. Probably not going to be a big merit aid school for you. Same for Carnegie Mellon, need-based financial aid to admitted students committed to meeting demonstrated need. Let's see, not based on grades or test scores, but on their family's financial need once again. So merit scholarships, not going to be a big thing. So you can research websites. I also have a green star here. I have this on several slides. Great question to ask on campus visits. So go ahead and ask that during the information session or during the tour. I will be honest, during the tours, sometimes the student tour guides don't always know. So I would try to ask an actual admissions officer. They're going to have better information than sometimes the students do. I have experienced that a few times. I mentioned some schools will have charts. If they do give merit aid, here's an example from Kentucky. I love schools that have charts like these. Super straightforward. Here's your GPA. Here's your test score, and here's how much money you're going to get. Awesome. Great. We know going into it, if we have this test score, this GPA, we're going to get $10,000, for example. If you do test optional and you've got this GPA, you still get $10,000. So very straightforward, great for planning purposes. Once again, another great question to ask though on campus visits. If you don't see it on their website, you can ask, do you have automatic merit scholarships? Do you have a chart or a list of certain GPAs that get certain amounts of money? Go ahead and ask that. And then here's another example of a chart. This is why you have to read these charts very carefully. Kentucky was automatic, very, cut and dry, easy. This is Purdue. So they've got a chart here too, 16,000, 10,000, 5,000. 5,000 is actually at Indianapolis campus. But if you look at these details, it's a holistic review process. It's not automatic. So the students getting the 16,000, exceptional academic achievement, leadership, and service, and it's a holistic review. Same for their 10,000, holistic review. Achievement Leadership Service. This also is a screenshot from their website that their scholarships, only about 15% of applicants receive a merit award. So you know that Purdue, especially as an out-of-state student, but really for a lot of their students, is going to be difficult to get merit scholarships. So read the details of what's listed in there. If you see something like holistic review or things beyond just GPA and test scores, know that that's going to be potentially more competitive, a little bit more difficult to get than just those standard like GPAs, test scores get this amount of money. All right, your next strategy is leverage your student's academic profile. So as you're building your list, look at schools, include schools that have financial aid policies that support merit scholarships. So once you do your research, you see who gives merit scholarships, use that as a basis to starting to build your list. Include schools that offer merit scholarships to 30% or more students. That's going to give you a higher chance of getting them. Obviously, the higher percentage of students that get them, the more likely it is. So going up to even 50, 60, 70% would be great. You can use those Big J consulting charts. Super easy to see. Those last two columns on that non-need merit awards will show you how many, what percentage typically get merit awards. Include schools where your students' academic profile, so their GPA and test scores, is in the top 20 to 25% of admitted students. So you'll often see that middle 50% range for admission. If your student is above that and they're in that 20 to 25% top range, they're more likely to get money, because go back to that buyers and sellers. What are they trying to do? They're trying to attract top students. Your student, if they're above their average, the school's average profile, your student is going to help them. It's going to pull their stats up if they come. It's going to pull their admission stats up. So that's who they're trying to attract. So like I said, you might not get the prestige, you might not get the name brands, but you might get merit money if you're looking kind of to where you fall above their averages. And for schools with admit rates of 50 to 80%, there's several different places you can kind of find that. They tend to give a lot of money. Avoid or limit schools with admit rates of 25% or less. Those are the ones that don't tend to give as much money, or if they do give money, it's very, very competitive, and most other applicants are also competitive. So as a general rule of thumb, more selective the school, the less likely for merit aid. It's going to be more competitive, and also they don't necessarily need to give as much. And then strategy number 5, another one with some great questions to ask on your campus visits. Ask, are applicants automatically considered for scholarships? Or are there separate applications for some or all scholarships? I'm putting a little self plug in here, but we put together a list of hidden scholarships. So we consider the hidden scholarships the ones that have extra applications. So it's not just your application for admission. It's an ongoing resource. We have tons and tons of schools listed on there. We continue to add them as we find them, but you can check there as well to see if there's additional scholarship applications at any of your colleges. Ask if there's major specific scholarships available to incoming freshmen. I know I had a student this year who was accepted to Penn State, and then he was emailed a separate engineering scholarship application specific for freshman engineering majors at Penn State. So ask about that. Ask if they're renewable. That's going to be really important for planning purposes. Typically, there's some sort of criteria to maintain them, usually a GPA that you have to maintain in college, but find out what that is. And then so that you can plan moving forward, whether you're going to have that money every year or not. And then also ask if there's additional scholarships available to upperclassmen and how many are typically awarded. I tend to sort of think of these a little bit like the outside scholarships, in that they tend to be smaller amounts, not quite as reliable as those incoming freshman renewable scholarships, but still good to just have in your mind. I don't know that I would rely on them, but having them in your mind that they might be a possibility can be helpful. All right, and I'm going to turn it over to Amber. Oh, go ahead. Perfect time.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, perfect segue, but on the upperclassmen scholarships, students, once they get settled in at school, they almost like forget, like they're lulled into like, a sense of I'm here now and I'm past the application phase. So if they apply to those upperclassmen scholarships, they're in a smaller competitive pool simply because they're potentially only at their institution if they're upperclassmen institutional scholarships. But there are tons of national scholarships that are also for upperclassmen, and a lot of students lose steam or forget to apply. I don't have any statistics on this, but just working with teenagers over the years, if you've got a real go-getter, they apply to some of those scholarships nationally that are only for upperclassmen, they might have a smaller competition pool. All right. Third-party outside scholarships. So this would be the type of scholarship that maybe it's a local Rotary scholarship or Kiwanis, or like some of the students I work with, their church will give a scholarship or two to uh, children of members of the congregation. Usually smaller scholarships or outside scholarships are smaller amounts. Not always, there are exceptions, but we're talking small amounts, 2,000 less, usually non-renewable, but that's not a hard and fast rule. That's like a fine print rule, kind of like the Purdue chart with 9,000 footnotes. You just have to read the fine print. And sometimes it's just, you got to submit an updated application and you can renew it. And if students miss that on these smaller outside scholarships, then they can't count on that money for the next year. They are a great bonus if your student gets one. And even the little piddly $500 ones, I tell students, I'm like, if it took you 2 hours to work on this scholarship and I paid you $500 for it, would you do it? But as Jamie said, there is a return on investment to be considered because, the likelihood of getting a national scholarship much lower. So do not rely on outside scholarships as this 4-year college financing strategy. That is very unwise. As Jamie shared earlier, they take a lot of time and effort to apply to. I have, in 16 years, I've had one student who started applying to scholarships when he was like in 9th grade, because there's maybe like a handful, I'm talking like 5 or 6. But he started working on it, and over the years, more and more for like juniors and what have you. And I mean, he did so many of them, and I think he got maybe 3 over that time. So, I mean, he was really amazing and diligent, but it was a lot of extra time and money, or not money, well, time is money, but a lot of extra time and energy. So students, especially seniors who are already doing all the things, and they're pretty pooped out by the time they get to truly scholarship season, which tends to pick up around January. So to really muster that energy and motivation to then keep going with more applications, like that is a tall ask. And as we said, you got to think about the opportunity cost, the time and investment to maybe receive one. Um, but if it's local, much higher likelihood. So we say be strategic, know the college policies, because that time and energy that your student may actually muster and spend toward working on scholarships, we want to be sure that the schools they're applying to would actually apply those outside scholarships to remaining balances, not what we're about to talk about. So before I get to that, I already mentioned, but I'll review local scholarships. This is, in my opinion, this is where it's at. This is where students can, rack up a good amount, maybe not a ton of money, but maybe a couple thousand, focusing on local scholarships. These are often advertised through the school counseling office. How that is done depends on that school counseling department. I've seen some places where it's just posted on like a school information platform like Schoology. I've seen others where it's on Score or Naviance or School Links, and then still others where it's hardcore like paper copies on a bulletin board. So having your student know how the local scholarships are advertised is one step. And then if there are local organizations that aren't being advertised by the school counseling office, going to their website and seeing if they have any kind of scholarship offer is also worth your time. So we see here a lot of cities will have a foundation that kind of runs the application and awarding process for endowed scholarships. A lot of these are scholarships that are in memorial to someone, and it's usually fundraising from a family that's contributing to these. So or foundation usually has an application for those scholarships. And then there can be really specific ones that are just for students from your student's high school. And then I mentioned before Rotary Kiwanis. Sometimes parents where you work, there can be scholarships for children of employees. I already mentioned churches, and then any other community groups that the student or family members belong to. We want to focus on the scholarships where your student meets the specific qualifications. So if it's a scholarship for a student athlete and your student was not an athlete, that is energy wasted on that particular scholarship. Some scholarships are specific for a major. Some are visual or performing arts, and some are specific interests or hobbies. And sometimes it's just a graduating senior. So those are ones that we want to be judicious with reading the eligibility criteria. The last point here, this is an interesting, I don't know, it's like I have beef with these, but scholarships that are no essay, this is advertised a lot to seniors and it's very enticing. They're easy to apply for, but if it's just a click of a button, they get a ton of applications and it's not gonna, it's a lot harder to then get the scholarship. And sometimes I think that clicking the button is just to get them on like an email list. And then now they're getting bombed with, marketing email. So I'm always weary of those ones. All right, so strategic is important. So this is what I mentioned about that time and energy. And we want to be intentional about knowing the school's policies on how they take in outside scholarships. So this again would be a question, maybe not so much for the admissions office, but for the financial aid offices at the schools on your student's respective list. So we're going to talk about two terms here, scholarship stacking and scholarship displacement. When schools allow scholarships to be stacked, any student that earns additional outside scholarships, it's just added to it. I have a student right now who's at a small liberal arts college, was just deciding between two of them, very similar schools, and they were contacting financial aid because they were awarded a couple local scholarships, and they already had a really big academic scholarship as well as a need-based grant. And they wanted to know, can my scholarship cover, like they had maybe $5,000 remaining that they were going to need to pay. And they wanted to know if their scholarship would be applied to that balance. And it was amazing. That is called stacking, where it takes your balance down. Ooh. Scholarship displacement is where we go, wah, wah. Displacement means that the outside scholarship earned replaces the money awarded by the college. So your student did really hard work to maybe earn that scholarship, and now you've saved the college money. So it's a net gain of 0 for your kiddo. So example here, students accepted to a school that has a $40,000 sticker price. Maybe they get $30,000 in financial aid that the college awards. That could be a mixture of merit aid, need-based aid. They're left with an out-of-pocket cost of $10,000. That's the balance they have to now come up with. They earn $4,000 in third-party outside scholarships, but instead of that $4,000 bringing the total balance down to $6,000, the college reduces the financial aid award to $26,000, and the outstanding balance remains the same. Is it maddening? Yes. Do I agree with it? No. One other thing I'll say on this too that's kind of interesting is sometimes, like, I've run into a couple situations where if a student already has maybe scholarships to cover tuition, that third-party scholarship can't be applied to room and board. So I've had that happen more than once with certain schools, and that's also frustrating. So yes, madness. So know those schools' policies. And these are, as Jamie is so great at putting our little green star, questions to ask, more of the financial aid office than admissions. So how do those outside scholarships affect the financial aid package from the school itself? So if you say, do you allow stacking? Any financial aid officer is going to know what you're talking about. And then asking about the restrictions. How are outside scholarships combined with merit or need-based aid? And this is another thing that can happen. Is there a limit to how much outside money can be applied before they either adjust institutional aid or kind of shut down if they're even going to apply that outside money to the balance? So that's an example with the room and board that I just shared. If they practice displacement, what comes first? Will the university reduce a student's merit scholarship or potentially a need-based grant? A loan, which would be amazing, like please reduce my loans, or work study. What comes first in the pecking order? And almost always it's going to be the money that's coming out of the college's pocket. If the scholarship amount exceeds the direct costs, can it be used on indirect costs like books, supplies, or travel? And then will these scholarships impact financial aid eligibility in future years? I'm not going to pretend to be up on all of the various rules around taxes. I just filed mine yesterday, guys, but I'm not going to pretend to be up on all of that information. But how will getting this money impact, will I have to report that on taxes? And that is a question more for, like I said, I don't actually know the answer to that one. So if someone in the participants group does, I would love to know. So these are important questions to ask the financial aid office. And then Jamie has compiled here for us pretty much everything she has referenced in the course of this presentation. Our last one here being The Price You Pay for College. All of us as a team read this book last year for our book group, and it's exceptional. It's well articulated how to think about college almost as a business, but then it gives a lot of great advice on how to think about paying for college as a family and helping your student understand what those costs entail.
Yep. I do think that when we send out, we're going to send out a recording of this, and I believe we're going to include the slides, and these are clickable links. So you should be able to click directly to them. You can also Google them if needed, but these should be able to go directly to them once you get a copy of it.
Mhm.
And that is everything we had for you. So let's open it up for questions. Feel free to put them in the Q&A. Also, if you are interested, we have a newsletter. It's just once a month. It's not super intrusive or anything, but once a month has great information with some tips. And upcoming events. So if you enjoyed this webinar and you're interested in seeing other webinars that we put together, feel free to sign up for our newsletter and you'll get notified of all of those. Our email addresses are also down here on the bottom. If you have specific questions for us, feel free to reach out to us and we will open it up for questions. So Amber, do you want to throw the questions out to me and then I can try to answer, or we can answer together?
Yes, absolutely. And I was going to say, I will put the link to our newsletter sign up in the chat as well. So you'll
Oh, that'd
have
be
it
great.
in two places. So there was a really great question. Shout out to one of our fellow IACs that came through that I purposely saved to answer live. And the question was, in the wake of so many schools starting to require test scores again, are we seeing a return to test scores in consideration of who gets merit? Um, I'll say this. I think behind the scenes in admissions, even if a school has been test optional, I think if students submit scores, I've seen there be variation, like among similar students, but with different scores admitted. Like our internal data would suggest that maybe we don't get to know if test scores that maybe one student submitted and another didn't, or one had a lower test score than the other. We don't get to know if test scores influence the merit amount, but there seems to be a correlation there that we've noticed happening across the board. We don't have enough data points that in the like major return to requiring tests, since that has really only started to happen just in this last year that we're seeing the fallout. It'll really impact class of 2026. So stay tuned because we might see, you know, test scores as a requirement for merit again at schools that are requiring them for admission. So that's another good question. If to add to your list of questions to ask, if you're visiting a school or your students interested in a school that now requires test scores, asking are test scores factored into the awarding of merit or not? Especially, I mean, if your student has a super strong test score, you don't need to ask that. But if they're more on like a middle level of that admitted 50%, that's a great question to ask.
Perfect. And actually, alongside that, I mean, it's not exactly related, but on the same vein of just things changing. Sort of like I mentioned with OSU's moral scholarship, I think you're going to see this at probably a lot of colleges. Any scholarships that have a social justice component or race or gender or identity may be changing. We don't know. And so just kind of keep an eye on that, keep an eye on the news. We're us as consultants, I know we're very aware of what's happening and we're part of IECA's national organization. There's lots of talk and sharing among, what everybody is seeing. But those are probably up in the air right now. Yep. Any other questions? I think we're good.
Yeah, that was a great question. It's funny how long we've been in test optional mode that I I found myself like remembering, oh yeah, I used to tell families and students to ask if test scores are factored into merit aid. That was a big question that I had students ask 5 years ago, and it's fallen out of my list of questions to consider when vetting schools because it hasn't been a required standard for a long time. So got to start factoring that back in.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And like I said, we will be sending out a recording and we're planning to send copies of the slides as well. So all of the clickable links should be there for you. Feel free to reach out to us if you have questions and have a great night.